Welcome to episode 81 of Stageworthy. I'm your host, Phil Rickaby. Stageworthy features conversations in Canadian theatre with artists of all stripes, from actor to director to playwright and more. If you want to drop me a line, I would love to hear from you. You can find Stageworthy on Facebook and Twitter at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website at stageworthypodcast.com. If you are in Toronto on June 25th, 2017, I would love for you to come out to something I'm doing called Shakespeare Retranslated. It's a reading of Romeo and Juliet. And Shakespeare Retranslated is something I've been working on. It's going to be a fundraiser for a show I'm going to be doing in November. But for this, what happens is I'm going to take Romeo and Juliet, I'm going to run it through Google Translate and translate it into another language and then translate it back into English. And then I'm going to make a very talented and brave group of actors read it. You can find this on Facebook. You can search for Shakespeare Retranslated. You'll find it there. You can find it on brown paper tickets as well. And tickets in advance, $25, $30 at the door. I would love to hear you. I'd love to see you there. So hopefully you can come out. My guest this week is actor, choreographer, producer, writer, and director Chantal Forde. Chantal's play Grey premieres at the 2017 edition of the Toronto Fringe Festival. Your show is Grey.
Yes.
Is the title.
Yeah.
And you've written it.
Yes.
Now, I was looking... There are little hints in what you sent to me, the description of the show, that made me think that it's based on a true story. So I've done some Googling, just trying to find if there are some familiar names. And so I've come to the assumption that Grey is not based on a true story.
It is not based on a true. It is very loosely inspired.
Okay.
Very loosely inspired by a newspaper article I read a decade ago. Okay.
Can you describe Grey for me?
Yes. Well, we've just been working on our tagline for the program. So, I'll read it to you. Tell me if you think it's good. Yeah. Because we were just tossing it back and forth. I was like, is this a good concept for 3 sentences?
Oh, yeah, this is for the program.
For the program.
That's like, I was just saying to somebody just this week, like, isn't that the hardest thing to, like, sum up the whole thing in, like, 3 sentences?
And in a catchy way.
Yeah, in a way that makes people say, I have this in that show.
Yeah. So this is the one that we've settled on so far. 12 years after the murder of his son, Charlie Alexander is face to face with the killer on the day of his parole hearing. Jumping through time to explore the events surrounding the murder and the circumstances that brought them to that place, we discover that not everything is as black and white as one would like to perceive. It's like, it feels like it's a little wordy for a 2 or 3 sentence.
A little bit wordy.
Maybe for the bigger one.
Yeah.
It'll work, but I think for the 2 to 3 sentences,
it can be trimmed a little bit.
Yeah.
Just to throw that out there. But
yeah,
it's good. It's good.
That's the basic idea of it.
Wow, yeah. So, this article, you saw this article like 10 years ago?
Yeah.
And it must have stuck with you for a while.
It did a lot. So the article was a man, it was like this big in the paper, and it was a man who his son had been killed at a house party. And with an axe.
Ooh.
Yeah, like brutal. So he had been... It was his friend's house. Some unwanted guests came. He decided to stand up for them. One of the unwanted guests grabbed an axe. It was in the garage. They grabbed an axe off the wall and killed him. And so in this article, it was an interview with the father, like mini interview. And he'd also just lost his wife 4 months prior to cancer. And it just like was devastating.
Yeah.
It was just like it was the only child they had. That was his whole life gone in 4 months, and so that it just stuck with me. I was like, I don't know when and I don't know what this show will be, but in there somewhere, that's a crazy story that needs to be told.
Yeah.
So that's where it sat with me, and throughout, like over the last 4 years, I guess it's sort of come in and out of my head, and I was like, oh, maybe it's a story about this, maybe it's a story about antidepressants and how we deal with grief. Maybe it's a story about this. And then, I guess it was last summer, it just sort of was like, oh, no, what happens if you take somebody who's in a neighborhood that's known for gang violence and known for these things, but it's a culture that they love. You take them out of the neighborhood and they still get killed. Who's to blame?
Had you been like writing it on and off with different ways of like looking at it, or were you just thinking about how it might be?
I wrote outlines.
Okay.
I wrote outlines for the different sort of ideas that were there.
Mm-hmm.
And this one stuck with me, especially, so I work at a restaurant, and I was chatting with a regular that comes in who usually doesn't talk, and one day he came in and he didn't stop talking. It was totally bizarre. I didn't know what was going on, and we started chatting, and he found out that I'd grown up in Oakville, and he just started asking questions about it. And it turns out that he and his wife had been having a lot of conversations about if they wanted to move. And so he had thought, maybe Mississauga, so it's still close to work and whatnot. And his wife was very not about it because they're a black family. And she was just like, I don't think the culture's going to be the same. I want our kids to grow up in an area where they can see themselves everywhere and their culture is reflected. Yeah. And so he'd been asking about that, and that sort of nail in the coffin, so to speak, where I was just like, that's what it is. That's how the story works, and how the father wanted one thing, did something for the good of his son, and then lost his son anyway. Yeah. And
does working in a restaurant, do you get a chance to watch people and like learn about people?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's half the fun of it.
Yeah.
Like constantly I'm just in the back writing down, so I'm like, just overheard this. Like remind myself of that later.
Do you ever watch like people and just like without even having to listen to them, like
and make up their entire stories?
What's happening between them?
Yep, all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's ridiculous, but most of the time, yeah.
Well, I mean, even if it's ridiculous, that's still like relationships play out over dinner, right? And people don't tend to pay attention to the staff.
No, not at all. Like sometimes you'll stand there for 60 seconds and they're just finishing their conversation before they'll take a break to look up at you. So you're like, well, I could interrupt or I could just listen. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Have you always been a writer?
No.
No? Okay.
No, I started as an actor. Okay. Well, in my childhood, I started as a dancer. I decided I was going to go to university for science, for forensic psychology, actually, was what I was interested in. But then my mother pointed out that I was basing my university choice on which had the best extracurricular theater. She was like, maybe you want to consider auditioning for theater schools, like all good parents say.
Wait, I have to stop right there and ask about that particular thing, because that's not a thing that a parent normally says.
No, and she instantly regretted it. That quite literally. I was like, I've been accepted to Guelph, Queens, and I can't remember where the other place was, and it was like, well, I got a scholarship here, and got this like minor scholarship here, and this one's for science. My friend's going here, but Queens has the best theater program, so I can still do that, and I just kept talking about it. Yeah, so she actually found three programs that were auditioning. And I was like, I don't know. She's like, just go, just so your options are there. And I went, and I accepted, and then she started questioning everything.
Had you been on like an academic track until you started looking for universities? Like, had you been, like, when you were in high school, people were like, what do you want to do after high school?
Oh, it never crossed my mind to go into the arts. Okay. I loved it. I mean, when I was a kid, of course, I was like, I'm going to be a star, I'm going to be a dancer, I'm going to be on Broadway, I'm going to do this and that. But in high school, no. Like, I danced and all the way through. I did all of this extra, like the after-school theater programs and to drama class. But no, I'd never crossed my mind to audition for a theater school. Just, I guess I didn't know anybody who had done it. All of my friends, all of my family, nobody had done it. It just didn't really occur that it was actually an option.
Yeah. If you don't know it's not an option, you can't make it an option.
Yeah. So, I think my mother, she may regret that now.
So you came to acting through dance.
Yes.
So, were you one of those children that was dancing from the time that you were, like, walkable?
I started dancing when I was 3. But I didn't start taking classes at like our respectable ballet school until I was 8. So that was, so it was always sort of in and out. And then when I realized this is the one thing that I really want to do, like forget gymnastics and figure skating, dancing is what I want to do. So then I started dancing at a ballet school.
Ballet.
Ballet is what I started with. For probably the first 5 years, I only did ballet, and then we added in modern, then we added in jazz, and we added in tap.
Was there anything that made you decide that ballet dance was not the thing that you were going to do with your life?
Oh, I wasn't good enough.
Oh.
My body was all wrong. Like my feet my arches aren't good enough for point. So it got to a point where I couldn't do the ballet exams anymore when point was a big section of them.
Right.
So I knew I would never be a ballet dancer. And my turnout wasn't good enough. I didn't have enough flexibility. So while I was very good on stage, that's normally why I would pass the exams was performance.
Right.
But physically, my body wasn't cut out for dancing.
Just at all? Or just ballet dance? Like, did you find that jazz was the same sort of thing?
No, I probably could have followed up in jazz, but I think my basis was so strong in ballet that it didn't actually seem possible to go forward in a professional way in dance without a strong ballet basis, which is probably incorrect. But again, I made the decision when I was 17.
Yeah, well, you make these choices. So you went, but you were doing theater at the same time as that in school?
Yeah.
What kind of shows were you doing? Were you doing musicals? Were you doing...
We did the first play I ever did was an Agatha Christie murder mystery.
Okay.
I cannot remember the name of it. I was in grade 7, but I had to do a really bad Cockney accent. Yep. My cousin was in the audience and yelled out in the middle of it, no, that's Chantal. It's like, thanks for ruining it.
Yeah.
Because they didn't know. And then in high school, it was across. We did Shakespeare. We did Midsummer Night's Dream. We did The Miser, Moliere. We did some musicals. We did Guys and Dolls. We did Leader of the Pack. Yeah, so it was a big variety.
That's good. It was a lot of variety.
It was a lot of variety.
So, you were going to go and you were going to do this forensic psychology thing.
Yep.
And then you...
Totally got diverted.
Your mom saved you from that. And to her regret, perhaps. What were the schools that she found for you to audition for?
American Academy of Dramatic Arts, Randolph, and Sheridan.
And where did you end up going?
Randolph.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to do American Academy, but it was really expensive. I didn't want to do Sheridan because I grew up in Oakville and I didn't want to live at home anymore.
Right. That's legit.
Yeah.
Because, if you're going to go to college, you should not live at home.
No. My mom was like, it's so great. You can just walk to school. I was like, no, I'm not even auditioning. I don't care how good the school is. I'm not auditioning because I don't want to live in here anymore. Time for me to go.
Yeah.
So Randolph. Randolph was the choice.
And you're at Randolph, and is it a 2-year, 3-year course?
2 years.
2 years?
It's two year round.
Okay.
So it's still 6 semesters, but done in 2 full years.
That's a pretty intense.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah.
And it's a conservatory program, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And how were you? So I'm sort of like finding this this writing thread. Were you writing in school, or is that like a really recent thing?
I always loved writing.
Okay.
I have my first poem that I ever wrote when I was 7, and I wrote it on my grandmother's floral notepad. It was all about how war is bad. And it started with poetry. Definitely. I had all the little books of Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Shakespeare poetry and then short stories. And it never crossed my mind to write a play until I was in theater school. We had the choice once of writing a monologue for ourselves, or we could take one and change it and adapt it.
Right.
So I wrote my own, and that was the first time I ever wrote anything to do with theater.
How did that go?
Great. Yeah, it was so freeing. I was like, I can create a whole world here. I don't have to... It still didn't enter my mind that I was interested in doing it. It was just really fun.
Yeah.
I organized some of our classroom projects So I would take the monologues and piece them together to make a show. When we graduated, a few friends of mine wanted to put together a cabaret to try to get agents. So they all chose their sort of top 5 songs. Right. And then I created a script around it so that we could create a show. So but again, didn't think about being a writer. I just did it because I was like, oh, sure, I can do that. And then I'll act.
So when did writing for theater start, like considering that you were writing for theater, start being a thing?
A good friend of mine told me that I was a writer. Not even joking. I had moved to Vancouver with my friend and her husband, and they moved out there. They're like, we think you should come. It's great out here. There's lots of business. Like, you can get an agent. So I went out and we were sitting, and we'd just been he was into writing, and I don't know what we were talking about, but one day he was just like, you're not an actor, you're a writer. I was like, no, I'm not. He was like, yes, you are. And I refused it. And then he's like, you wrote this, you've done this, you think like this. You're a writer. And I fought it for a couple of years. And then I saw a musical that was being workshopped, and I had a ton of ideas for it. And my friend ended up putting me in touch with the creator, and we started talking, and I started dramaturging, and then I ended up writing the book for it, and that was what actually got me in. I was just like, here's how we can do this.
Do you know what it was you were fighting against about writing?
I don't. I don't know. I think it was probably the idea of giving up something that I had studied and worked for and had set my mind. Like, I was like, there's no plan B. I'm going to be an actor. I'm going to be successful. This is it. Right. And I think I just determined that so much in my head that I didn't really see outside of it. Also, I'd never studied it. Right. I didn't know, I'd never taken any courses in writing, so there was also that fear of, okay, so this one person said that I'm good, and a couple people have said that they like what I do, but that doesn't mean anything. I've been told that I can perform for my whole life. I haven't been told anything about writing. Right. So it was, I guess fear of failure was the biggest thing.
Well, I mean, there's also, I don't know, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about the Randolph program. Do they talk about self-producing at all? Or are they preparing you for the traditional acting track where you audition, get the job, and so on and so on and so on?
The basis of it is in traditional theater, for sure. They do encourage it more now than ever. Now that they've moved to not now, I went to school a million years ago when I was over on Yonge. Right. But the Bathurst Street Theatre and their involvement with Fringe, that sort of introduced people to the idea of creating your own work and what the festival circuit is. We definitely did a few workshops that were in different sort of areas, like the business areas, and so while there wasn't a big push for it, they definitely introduced the idea to us.
When I was in theater school so many years ago, the idea of being anything other than an actor, it was like we got the sense that there was no such thing as an actor / anything. If you were going to be an actor / anything, then you had failed at being an actor. Sort of like the idea that the unspoken idea that was sort of in our heads, I think, at the time. It certainly was in mine. And I think that a lot of us were like, if people see you as anything other than an actor, they're going to make you do that.
Right.
So the idea of oh, I'm also a writer. Well, then we'll make you do writing. That's what the thing they're going to make you do. They are going to make you do whatever.
the unknown.
Those theater people who will make you do things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is Grey your first play?
No. It isn't. I did one in the Fringe in 2015. Okay. And that was my first full-length play. I'd written a bunch of short plays before that. And that was Perceptions of Love in the Pursuit of Happiness. Okay. So that was the first. Okay. That was a 90-minute. That was the first full one. And then before that, I'd written 10, 20, and 30-minute plays for festivals and events.
What was it like seeing your first full-length play performed in front of a Fringe audience for the first time? Was that like...
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrifying. Like, there were 3 days leading up to it where I was sure I was going to throw up every 5 minutes. I was terrified. 100% terrified.
But when it was happening, how long did you go from I want to vomit to whatever you felt afterwards?
At the end of the first run.
Okay.
Yeah, the end of the first run. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe it's not so bad.
Yeah. That want to vomit feeling, I think, is a pretty common one for a new project and things like that.
Yeah.
I had that last summer. I was performing my own thing, and I spent the whole day, the full day before I performed it, feeling I was going to vomit.
It's the worst.
It is the worst. I think we just have to, like, I don't know, grab a baggie.
It's like, okay, well.
So was Grey written before you got into the Fringe Festival this year, or was it like in progress?
It was in progress.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I imagine getting into the Fringe sort of lit a fire.
Oh yeah. You're like, oh, we're actually doing this? Okay, back to the computer. Let's go.
Yeah. And so you're working. You're not acting in it. You're just writing.
Writing and co-directing.
Okay. And has it been difficult finding all the people that you need to fill the roles of the play?
We just finished casting yesterday.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, we had our final actor in place yesterday.
Nice.
There was a few challenges in it, particularly the one character that's the father character, because he has to span from age 28 to age 52. So finding somebody that could play all ends of the spectrum.
That's tough.
Yeah.
How do you find, and I imagine without any time for makeup, for one thing.
Oh yeah, no. They're going to most likely be on stage for the entire time. So it'll just be a matter of glasses or a jacket or hair up versus down. That's the only switches that there will be. It was very difficult, and especially that particular character is black. So finding a black man that can play 28 to 52 in a pretty, a reasonably challenging role, emotionally challenging role was, that was.
Did you find it hard to, there's a lot of, there's the whole, we need to have more diverse theater, things like that. People are often told, people who run theaters, I've heard it said, you have to seek out the community, get the community to come to you. Was that, and I agree with that, but did you have trouble reaching out to find the people to audition for this role? Did you have trouble
No.
Did you know where do you even go to find?
I for the most part, I went to the regular sources, eDrive, Tappa. I reached out to Obsidian Theatre and what is the other one? There's one other theater, but I reached out to them to pass the casting notice along to anybody they thought might be appropriate, and that was it. That was all. There was a huge amount of people came out.
That's great.
Yeah, it was really nice. It was except for the older man, the other roles were there was so many people, and we actually had one person come out and he was great. After the audition, we wanted to call him back. When he came back, we were looking at his resume, and he'd only done film and TV, and quite a lot, and regularly. Yeah. So I sort of asked him why now? Why do you want to do theater? And he'd only ever seen one play before.
Okay.
Which was mind-blowing. And he said, and it was Raisin in the Sun was the only other play he'd seen, and he said that he saw the breakdown and just the content. That was the appeal. He said it sounded interesting, and it didn't really occur to me, other than the fact that I knew I was going to have a hard time casting the father. It didn't occur to me that would be part of it, that people would say, oh, that's a role that's specifically for me, not just any ethnicity. This is specifically for me.
Right.
And I've always, heard people say that, like, you want to see yourself reflected on stage and see all the things, but it didn't occur to me. And then when somebody said that, I was like, it's true. This role is actually for you.
Right. Not
for anybody.
You had a moment when you were saying that you'd only ever seen one play where you it's almost like you in this, as you were describing that, you couldn't believe that anybody could only have ever seen like one play.
Oh yeah, it blew my mind.
And yet, have you ever been talking to somebody and they say about what you do, oh, I don't like the theater, I saw a play once, I've never...
Yes!
Yeah, right? This is another thing that's been coming up a whole lot lately, is that it's like that, and like people like do that, and like, you don't do that when you see a bad movie.
No, you don't do that. You don't go out for food and go to a restaurant and say, well, that food was terrible, I'm never going to a restaurant.
Never eating food again.
never, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that TV show was bad, I guess, but if throw on the television set. Yeah. Oh, and yet theater is this thing where people just... I think that people have a perception that it's for elite, that they can't afford it or it's not for them.
Yeah.
Which is sometimes not helped by certain theater prices.
For sure.
And the scarcity of tickets. And it can be intimidating to go to a big theater. Like you've never been before, and you're like, all you've got is like these massive, gorgeous theaters, and that's what you're thinking theater is.
Yeah.
That's frightening.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It is. And I don't know, that's part of why I love Fringe, because it's so accessible.
Yeah.
And people that maybe are unsure, like, oh, well, it's only $12.
Yeah.
Okay. All of a sudden it's like, well, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
And then you also only spent $12 and 60 or 90 minutes of your time. So if you didn't love it, it doesn't feel like it was a huge investment.
Yeah,
lost.
a lot of times, like, the stakes are so low for Fringe.
Yeah.
Because most of the shows are 60 minutes, and you're like, well, $12 in an hour of my life?
Yeah. Okay. I'll try. Why not?
Yeah. I love the chaotic nature of Fringe, that you don't know, because it can be anything, because anybody can enter that lottery. Yep. And I love that regardless of what city I'm in for a Fringe, it's like I call it, it's a crapshoot, because you don't know, especially if you go that first weekend. If you're one of the brave ones who doesn't wait for the reviews, which I highly recommend, is like go to a show and you don't know, and maybe it's crap, or maybe it's not.
Maybe it's great.
It might be amazing. I think to myself, imagine a person who was in, I don't know, the first performance at Toronto Fringe of Kim's Convenience and didn't know how amazing that was. I mean, word spread, but like was there that first night. And it was this amazing thing, you know?
Totally.
How awesome would that be?
Yeah. It's like you got in on it before.
Yeah.
Before it was the big hit.
When did you discover Fringe?
I think it was just after I finished school. I'm pretty sure. So I guess around maybe 2002, 2003 was one of the first times that I went just as an audience member. The first time that I participated in Fringe was actually the Vancouver Fringe Festival.
Okay.
I directed a show in that, and then ever since I've directed a couple of shows, been in a couple of shows.
Other than Vancouver and Toronto, have you done any other Fringe festivals?
No.
Have you ever thought about doing other Fringe festivals?
I have thought about doing that.
What's on your list?
Well, I would kind of like to do across Canada. Yeah. One of those ones. Just travel across. I've heard that the one in Manitoba,
Winnipeg?
The Winnipeg one, I've heard is amazing.
It is. And if you only know Toronto or Vancouver, you are in for a surprise.
Yeah.
Winnipeg and Edmonton, everybody knows.
Yeah.
Like, you know how if you walk up to somebody in Toronto and you go, come see my Fringe show, most people are like, what's Fringe?
Yeah.
Winnipeg and Edmonton, if you say, come see my Fringe show, people will be like, oh, which theater?
Nice.
Like, everybody knows it's happening.
That's amazing.
It's like, it's the focus of the city.
Yeah.
A Fringe tour across this country is pretty incredible.
It would be pretty amazing.
The only downside is that once you get to the end of the summer, you have to make a choice as to which direction you go.
Yeah.
Whether you go west or whether you go to the Maritimes, because the Maritimes
they're in the fall.
They're in the fall. They're like end of August into September, just like Victoria and Vancouver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would be amazing. I think the key would be to either have a lot of money or a really tiny show.
Both go hand in hand. Both can cushion your trip, because of course everything costs money. And one of the things that I know, like when I was thinking about my own Fringe tours, that I didn't think about at first was the fact that your budget should include food.
Oh, right. People like to eat.
Yes.
Yeah,
like you should think
totally.
about that as you're putting money together, because most times you're thinking about props. What's it cost to run the show? Transportation. But you're not thinking about food.
No, you totally wouldn't.
Right?
At all.
And so you get, suddenly you're like, oh, if you don't do well at Fringe, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will mime for grilled cheese?
Well, that's a sign that might work in some places. I mean, there are some of the Fringes they have buskers that are at Fringes, so the mime for grilled cheese might work there too. Yeah. In terms of Grey, so you've got this play that was inspired by a true story, but is really your own invention. Mm-hmm. And you've just come up with you're working on your blurb for the program, and you've got all of you're getting together all of your promotional material.
Yeah.
What's it like for you preparing to hand this play to a bunch of actors when it's lived in your head for so long?
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited. There's been other shows that I'm not excited because there's that little fear of how all of the characters sound, and I don't know, there's something about this one where I'm intrigued by the cast. Right. First of all, I love the people that we've cast, and I can't wait to see where they take it. I think I haven't lived with this one as long as other plays. I'm a pretty slow writer. Okay. And I tend to get several drafts out before anybody even sees it. Because this one was a little bit faster for me, I think maybe it just hasn't sat with me as long, so I don't have as clear of an idea. I know that there are switches. It takes place in 3 time periods. So I know that in order to make it the most effective, there's probably going to be some shuffling of where the scenes go. Right. But I won't know that until I see it on its feet. So I think this will be a little bit more of the first month of rehearsal will be a lot more workshop-y rather than, okay, let's get into rehearsal right away. So it'll be nice to sort of get that input and work with people to see how it actually can come together.
When you say that you're usually a slow writer, how long does it usually take from beginning of writing to it's quote-unquote done on average?
I mean, a lot of it depends on if there's a deadline.
Yeah.
So I can be a fast writer. But, it also, I don't know. I haven't actually sat and tracked it out. I guess I started writing this one in the fall, but then I had to take big breaks because I was in busy productions. Right. So I have never, when I've sat down and wrote something straight, I did a short play. It was 30 minutes, I guess, and that took about 3 weeks to write. Okay. So in that case, it didn't feel very long, but there was a deadline.
Yes. Yeah.
This one took me 10 years, in essence. Really. I read the article and knew I wanted this to be a play, but I didn't actually have the right idea until the fall. So I guess usually for this being my third full length, I did a musical as well. On average, it's a year from pen to paper to I feel comfortable putting this out in the world.
Usually, when you're going through that process, do you bring in people to read it at various points, or does it just live in your head for most of the time?
Mostly lives in my head. Yeah. Mostly. When I've come to a draft that I'm comfortable sharing, I share it with my husband first. He's also an artist and a writer, so he'll do it first, and then give me his feedback, and then I'll shape it, and then I'll bring in usually a couple close friends when it's the second or third draft to read it with them. And then based on that, I'll revise it more and then maybe share it with an audience. So, because it makes me want to vomit.
Yes, well, that's
it's terrifying. Yeah, every time I share any work, the first draft, even with my husband, the first time I'm just panicked because I was like, what if it's terrible? Well, what if this is awful?
I know what you mean. Anytime I write something and, I'll share with my girlfriend, but, some people who aren't in theater sometimes have difficulty reading scripts. So she's like, when you do a reading, I want to hear it, because then it'll make sense.
Yeah.
So then, that's great, but then I'll get, some people together, and the whole time that they're getting ready to read it, I'm just, my glasses are fogging up because my body temperature is so high. I'm, trying to not show that I'm sweating. I'm not throwing up, but it's just, the tension is so, it's oh, I don't even know this is working.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just so stressful the whole time.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Why do we do this?
It is. Why do we continue to pursue something that we're clearly insecure about? And that is so nerve-wracking, but then we can't be that insecure because we continue to do it.
I think that we're insecure because that first time we don't know if it works. But when it does,
it's true.
It's that whole feeling of it's so good. Yeah. And then you want to do it again.
It's true.
Yeah. And it's not just yes, there's that little while of I'm so insecure, but then once it's working, you're I did that. There's that sort of thing.
It's true. Yeah. It's true.
You were mentioning some other productions that you had in the fall. What have you been working on?
In the fall, so my husband and I do a pantomime every year out in Oakville, and so it's a co-production, so it's semi-professional. Most of the professional part is on the technical side, and then we work with a community theater group to do the acting side with a couple of professional actors in it, and so that was our fourth year.
That's fun
doing it there. It's the total opposite of Grey.
So you do that in Oakville. Are you living in Oakville?
No, I live downtown. Oakville? I'm from Oakville.
So you go back to Oakville to do this thing as sort of a way of keeping in touch with home?
It was actually 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I guess, my mother. Again,
your mother.
My mother.
Your mother.
She was the one that put me in touch with this group that they had just gotten a grant to hire a director, and they wanted to do a family show, and they were thinking about a pantomime, and so she was the one that put me in touch with them, and so thanks, Mom.
And that's been a 4-year thing.
Yeah, and we just have confirmed dates for the 5th year. So
amazing.
And it's been incredible. I guess there's only really one theater there, and there's not a ton of family stuff. There's stuff for kids, and then there's lots of adult stuff. And there was a need for it, and we didn't know. The first year we did 4 shows because we had no idea how it was going to go. And they sold out like crazy. And now we do 7 shows, and most of them sell out.
Yeah.
And the kids are just except for a lot of them, it's their first time seeing theater.
Yeah.
And
that's one of the reasons why panto is so important, is because for most kids that have the opportunity to see it, it's the first time they're in a theater seeing a play.
Yeah.
Which is incredible to think about.
Yeah. That introduction.
Yeah.
What a fun way to be introduced to theater.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And are you writing these shows?
Yes.
Where do the themes that you're writing the pantos come from? Do they come to you and say, this is what we would like to do? Or do you just decide on what it's going to be that year?
We just decide. Yeah, we decide on the show, and then the sort of themes that we're going to take the twist up with come after we've decided. Usually on a patio over wine in the summer.
And is the best time to think about a show for the fall? Is it October or November that you do that? Is that
we actually do them. We do them in December.
Nice.
The shows run in December, right over Christmas. But we write them in the summer.
Yeah,
and then
pantos
rehearse over the fall.
I find it's amazing, but also a little bit tragic that the time when we think about theater for children is at Christmas. And it's great that we have this thing. The kids are out of school. We have a thing for them to do. But it's like the one time of year that we actually think we should do something for kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's weird. Why not?
Yeah.
More throughout the year, throughout the summer.
I mean, there are places for it. You've got Young People's Theatre.
Yeah.
You've got Solar Stage in North York. But it's like we do it for kids on a large scale because like those pantos are often like big deals. Mm. We do it at that one time of year rather than like throwing a thing for kids on at any other time of year.
Yeah. It's I guess they're also thinking that that's when it'll sell, right? From a production standpoint, it's like they're specifically looking for something to do. So let's offer it in those times. But yeah, it is unfortunate, and it's hard to seek it out, especially if you're outside of the downtown core. Mm-hmm. It's like all of a sudden you're like, am I going to make the trip in?
Yeah.
To see this thing.
It's also like. You like when you go. It's like I've got like this 2 weeks with this kid. I got to get something going on. Right?
Yeah.
Is there anything that Panto has taught you that you didn't know before about writing?
It will change daily depending on your actors. I mean, it is a Panto. It's supposed to be that way, but it's improved my comedy skills a lot. Definitely. That's been a big thing, is figuring out timing and figuring out when you need the breaks and how to incorporate that. So it's definitely, improved that aspect. That's probably the biggest thing. Yeah. Do you tend to write outside of, you've written Grey and that took you technically 10 years to write, but really only like a few months. Outside of like things when you have an idea, do you tend to write really constantly, or do you write specific for projects now? I write for projects, but I mean I journal always, and I find that I write still poetry. That's sort of something that's just always there, just based on something I saw or an emotion or so that's probably the constant. I haven't really written a short story in a long time. I think about it.
I think about writing short stories too, and then they turn into plays.
Yeah.
Right?
Because it's that thing that I'm most comfortable with is theater. Yeah. I do have other projects on the go, but they're not theater, but they are screenplays. Yeah. So it's still in that world. I
always find that writing something that's not for theater, my instincts and the way that I write tends to go so much towards theater because I don't have to fill in so many blanks. Like a theater script is a collaboration that doesn't become completely finished until the director and an actors have done their thing with it. So you write the dialogue and some skeleton of a description, and then you pass it off to somebody else. Whereas a short story, you got to describe
That's all of it.
That's all of it. All of it is the words, and it's different. I find it's a different way of looking at writing.
Yeah, definitely. I would be interested to try something like Room, like where it's in the first person from a specific point of view.
Right.
That would probably be an interesting way of exploring a world that wasn't theater.
Because then you can think of it like a monologue in a way that, like a short story or a novel is not usually. But if you're writing in this first person, and
then figuring out how you get the exposition in.
Yes.
It would be.
It'd be
interesting. It'd be a cool exercise.
Yeah, it would. It would.
Challenge. Let's do it.
Absolutely. Let's get this writing going. The monologue that you wrote that first time. What do you remember about that first monologue that you wrote?
I remember that it was a child. I can't remember exactly, but I feel like it was somebody that was going into a memory of being a child. because I remember specifically that I had to be very physical. The exercise itself was meant to be very physical. And so it was a child in kindergarten telling his teacher about a hamster. What about it? I don't remember. These are the tiny little things that I remember. Something about a hamster and his experience in the classroom. Maybe the hamster died. Maybe the child accidentally killed the hamster.
Right.
I don't remember. But yeah, so there was a switch in H because that was the physical element that I was bringing in from the adult into this 5 or 6 year old.
Okay.
Yeah, that's about all I remember.
Do you remember if the first time you were performing that, did you feel as vomitous as you did?
No, it was the best.
Okay.
I loved it. I loved it because there wasn't any expectation of filling somebody else's words, or if somebody else had known the monologue, did you get it exactly right, or other people's perceptions of what that character should be. I was like, this is just my character.
Right.
So I make it what it should be. Yeah, no, I had fun during that.
Is there, like, I'm just going to delve into the psychology of, like, so there's that, which was, like, nobody knows and this is exhilarating, and then there's somebody else performing your stuff, which makes you kind of want to vomit the first time.
Yeah.
Can you think of some of the, like, the difference between the two? It's still your words.
Yep. Well, I think part of it was probably an age thing and a comfort thing. I was probably a bit more fearless because I wasn't being judged on the writing. I was being judged on the acting.
Okay.
In which I had a bit more confidence at that point. Whereas, so it was more about the performance. And there was no level of expectation.
Okay.
And the audience was my classroom.
Right.
So there was definitely a comfort level. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what it is. I think the idea, it's not so much other people speaking my words, because I think if I were to do a one-woman show that was all mine, I would still be terrified now. Because it's not in a classroom and because it is being put out there into the world.
Having just done that, yes, it is more terrifying than anything I've done. Yeah.
What was the show you were doing?
It was called The Commandment. I did it at the Hamilton Fringe last year.
Okay.
It was a solo show, so it was like, it's all my words. It's all me. If they hate this, they like...
That's you.
It's me. You. I have nothing behind the fuck. I can't
so
say,
scary.
Oh, the writer. Oh, the actor. I can't do...
It's not what I intended.
No, it's like... it's everything. So it's like more fear than I've ever had.
Yeah. No
Before
kidding.
I went on stage.
Right. And then after?
After I went on stage, the first time it was like this railroad. It was just like, it went and it was exhilarating, but it was just like a sort of like, oh, almost done. Oh, now it's done. I feel good. And that was fine. But the second time was exhilarating.
Yeah.
Just after getting over that first time.
Nice.
But the performance of a solo monologue is probably one of the most terrifying things I've done.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I bet.
But I kind of recommend. Like, now I've done it, I'm like, I want to do more.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that because they're great. Like Rick Miller.
Yeah. Danny McIver for me, like Danny McIver, like I would read his stuff and I'd be like, this guy,
Bigger Than Jesus was one of my favorite shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the first monologue I ever did was from House.
Yeah. Mine was Wild Abandon was the first one.
Oh, nice.
Like, just like I could sort of like mark my life, my theater life in various Danny McIver shows. Just like in terms of ones that I was reading and obsessing over at the time. Would you ever think about doing a show solo yourself?
Yeah, I did. I have. Okay. I have thought about it. I haven't thought of a story, and I don't know if I'll actually have the courage to do it. But a friend of mine who I met doing a Fringe show a couple of years ago, she was interested in doing one. She actually is doing it this Fringe. I don't know what it's called, though.
Who's your friend?
Ada Ballin.
All right.
I don't know how it's turned out. So we had a lot of conversation about how she would approach the subject matter and how she was going to write it. And and it sort of inspired me. I was like, this is so brave and so interesting, and I have some ideas, but I'm not exactly sure how I would go about it. But yeah, I think I would at some point.
Writing something like that is the question, because it's a sort of a different animal than writing a play, right? There's like so many different voices and dialogue and things like that. It's like, how do you approach this with one voice?
Yeah. It would be interesting.
Yeah,
I think at some point I would probably try it, because I still like performing. Like I still love that.
Yeah.
And don't do it all that often, but
it's a great way to do it.
Yeah.
Do you have a venue yet for
Passmarais?
Main space?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I'm so excited. It was our first choice.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I'm very excited.
Yeah. And it's such a great space, and I think it's really close to the Fringe tent this year.
It is quite. It's really close.
Yeah, it's like it will be the closest venue.
It's Dundas and Bathurst, right?
Yeah,
is the
thing?
Yeah.
So right up the street.
Yep. Oh, that's convenient.
That's a great space to flyer now.
Yeah. For your super close. It's true, because last year it was Randolph that was right across the street. Yes. So it's like, there's a show starting in 10 minutes. Let's go.
Yeah. Now you've got shows right over here, guys.
Yeah.
Which is a great way to
Good thinking. Yeah. It's gonna be great.
Yeah. It's a great venue. Well, we're pretty much out of time, but thank you so much for talking with me. This has been a lot of fun.